we are going to be joined. I've been looking forward to this conversation as well with Lori Garver. She was the deputy NASA administrator under President Obama. She was the lead civil space policy advisor for the president's 2008 presidential campaign and led the agency review team for NASA during the post-election transition. She also worked at NASA from 1996 to 2001, first as a special assistant to the NASA administrator and senior policy analyst for the Office of Policy and Plans, and then as the associate administrator for the Office of Policy and Plans. Welcome, Lori, to Steele and Ungar. I've been looking forward to talking to you because of the president's sort of new interest and push to send Americans to the moon and Mars in somewhat of a reinvigorated space program. Welcome.
Thank you. It is great to be here, Michael. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, well, it's
time.
It is exciting, and I know the first thing everybody's talking about. Okay, how do we pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? Okay, we'll get to the money in a moment. But the concept to me is a good one. The program that the president outlined yesterday is not going to be an entirely NASA-run operation. It's going to be a combination of both international partners as well as private space interests, those who can actually afford to build stuff to shoot into space. We're talking, Jeff Bezos with his Blue Origin program, and certainly Elon Musk's SpaceX program, which is probably one of the more advanced private space programs in the country. What's your thinking of this before we get into some other specifics like money and things like that? There was a quote by you that said you thought it was a good sign. Tell me more.
Sure. Presidents have been linked with big, bold space announcements in our history, and anybody who works in administration is pretty much always trying to get the president to do this, to make such a statement. And lots have done it, and unfortunately haven't really been the time to follow up. But I still think it's a good sign. You have an administration who doesn't even have a NASA administrator confirmed.
I know. Well, I was going to get to that.
They've
There is that little part.
the Space Council, though, which is a very important thing.
Right.
And have made a very bold statement here. I think going beyond low Earth orbit, back to the moon, onto Mars is something that we have wanted to do since we left the moon. And what has been holding us back is a combination of money and the political will. So now that you have, as you said, these commercial entities that are driving down the costs, you can harness that entrepreneurial spirit, which is something in our administration we work towards for just such a purpose. So I think it's a really good step, and I was excited that the president chose to do it, and that's the most positive thing
right. Now, okay, I got that.
So it's not partisan.
It's not partisan. But here, okay, so there are a couple of things that I want to unpack with you. So let me just share with you my predisposition on this program. I am a child of the Kennedy space age. I remember all of the moon launches. I mean, and the launches and trips to the moon. I remember watching the landing and tracking. I remember building my spaceships. I have always, and of course, I tie that into some very famous James Bond movies, like James Bond in Space, the Cold War era and all this. So, I'm all up into that, there. And I think it's exciting. And I agree with you. Presidents have talked a big, bold vision about it, but have really not put that vision to the test with resources and with structured planning by NASA itself, empowering NASA to get it done. If I were president, I always love these. If you were president, what would you do? One of the first things I would do would be expand the space program and tie it to every damn high school and university in the country. Because I would take the math and science programs and start developing those engineers that we're going to need to not just redo the whole space thing, but do it bigger, better, and sustain it. So you sort of build it into the economy if you will. And that's what some of the private sector guys are doing. Here's my rub. I'm also, because I'm a student of all these things in this period, I also do to some degree take seriously, Lori, the role that private sector can play and how that sometimes can turn a little bit maniacal. Okay. And I just think the more control the government has, I mean, it's one of the few things I don't mind the government having a full grip on, because I want it to be for purposes of exploration, not exploitation. And I think that's a very fine line when we talk about bringing in these private sector partners that are going to be bottom line driven and wanting to get their hands on resources in some of these locations like the moon and Mars.
Yes, that is fascinating. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
You do not think the government is
now you see my psychoses here.
That is awesome. So to me, that I'm same generation. We went to the moon for a purpose.
Right.
Everybody knows the purpose. We were beating the Russians. We were trying to win the Cold War, be the technological leaders. We have been searching for a purpose ever since.
True.
Just going for exploration is not enough. We have shown this for the last 50 years. Neil Tyson does a fabulous historic look at why we spend large amounts of money on projects. 3 reasons: fear, greed, and glory, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the pyramids, the great cathedrals, any exploration that we did was for fear, greed, or glory. It's not for exploration's sake. They didn't come to discover new things. They came to make money and find new trade routes, right?
Right.
So having commercial entities be in partnership with the government on this is nothing new. And if, as they explore, they find resources on the moon or
but that was not
beyond.
But Lori, that wasn't the push of the Kennedy era.
No, it was to beat those commies.
Well, I got that. So you're saying absent the desire to beat the Russians or to beat the commies,
some sustaining goal.
Gotcha.
The government cannot do things over the long term without a sustaining
goal,
purpose.
Right.
And we have not had that for 50 years. So either it's going to be a geopolitical beat the Russians again, beat the Chinese, or maybe
that's
the
where
space
I think the play
station
is,
model,
though.
like going with countries. So what's exciting, I think, about what was said in the Trump policy is that we are not going alone as NASA,
right,
as a U.S. government entity. Those days are really over, and we are going to invite other countries, and we are going to invite the very best minds in our private sector. And so are we going for fear, greed, or glory? There's probably a combination of that. Our fear is of being left behind. The glory is all those students you talk about, training and engineering. But what's wrong with a little greed? We're going because we want to expand our economic sphere.
I get the greed piece. And again, I'm just putting my confession out there. I'm old school, and I guess it really is for me anchored into this sort of beat the commies, the Russians. And part of that is because I see what's going on right now with Russia. You've got, the last of the great KGB figures running the country, wanting to relive and replay some of that glory, to get some of that glory back. Now, their economy can't sustain the kind of push into space. They can barely sustain, the push to get, fuel to its people in the winter, and I get that. So it makes sense what you're saying. Don't get me wrong. I totally get that.
And don't you think it's a little ironic that you're the Republican and I'm the Democrat?
I know.
And that the push
I get that a lot.
to have it be government is more socialist, and I'm more that the very Russian program that is showing it doesn't work. The capitalist program works, and I think it's part of this. Of course, we don't want to turn space into, Disney World. And
that's really my fear, that because how these people are. You know how,
my gosh.
they're already talking about, hey, we can, sell a seat to the moon. I mean, no, that's not what this is. This this isn't selling a seat to the moon. This isn't like getting on a merry-go-round or a roller coaster. But, again, I'm a little bit more old-fashioned in the sense that I like the idea of expanding our reach and doing scientific missions and explorations. I guess that explorer spirit is still much more in front for me than the entrepreneurial spirit.
And an explorer spirit settled the West. Explorer spirit
Exactly
in all of us.
Then the entrepreneurs
country.
came in.
But they went because they could homestead and keep the property, so
Yeah.
it's a mix. And I think it'll be a very healthy thing, and there's no way the government can do this thing on its own unless you're going to get upwards of 6% of the budget that we had in the 60s.
Yeah.
So NASA's less than 0.5% now.
I know. It's ridiculous.
And,
No, I really do. I just think it's ridiculous. I think that's an insult to the intelligence and capabilities of our scientists and the men and women, who work at NASA and have done, just yeoman's work. And again, for me, the whole idea of exploration is such a big part of how NASA drew a kid like me into wanting to shoot off rockets in the backyard and thought about going to the moon as an astronaut, and all those things. That part of it for me is a big deal.
If you go to schools now, and I've gone, you judge science fairs, and there's a NASA sticker right along with a SpaceX or a Virgin Galactic sticker. That is inspiring to students as well. It doesn't just have to be the government.
Yeah.
And while we're 0.5% of the federal budget, it is $19 billion. If you total the budgets of every space agency around the world, they don't equal NASA's. So we are still in the lead. I do take issue with, this is just how it's done with a new president. They're going to say, oh, I'm making the space program great again because we have lost it. We are still the lead. Having to buy seats from the Russians is unseemly. We are going to, hopefully within the next year, be flying our astronauts out of Florida again.
Yep.
On private sector vehicles.
That's the space launch system that they're talking about.
I work in the aviation industry now,
right?
And we don't think anything of flying on private sector vehicles. So there's nothing unseemly about that. It's much worse to be buying seats from the Russian government than from our own U.S. companies.
Well, I agree with that, and I guess from my perspective, where my passion got restoked again was the movie Hidden Figures. And it just really kind of, I was having all kinds of flashbacks, and it was even more elevated because now I was inside the room watching this stuff, that I, only saw from the outside as a young kid. And so that to me, if that kind of energy is stoked around the concept of not just putting a woman and a man or a family on the moon, but then going further to Mars and elsewhere, then I'm all, at the end of the day, I'm all for it. And so,
and you think about the sustaining nature of it. Part of this is sustainment, and governments aren't really there to sustain, right? You have to acknowledge that would be left to private entities.
Right.
So you don't want to just stop there. And obviously Apollo, those kind of monies could not be sustained. And we'd already obtained our objective.
Right.
So we beat the Russians. So if you want something that is going to go beyond and back to the moon and on to Mars, you need to keep those costs down. The seat price for what the Russians are charging us is $70 million, and we will pay a U.S. company half that. And those will be tax dollars we don't have to spend and can use on the lunar landing vehicle. So there are just so many things. And I, of course, love Hidden Figures as well. And you think about the excitement you could harness by even broadening your base and having your purpose for exploration be certainly more noble than trying to beat somebody else.
That is so well put, and I don't have a rejoinder to that other than it's not too bad to beat someone else every once in a while.
We all, in fact, there's a great,
particularly when they're Russian.
Norm Augustine, one of the great aerospace CEOs, said, "Yeah, well, look at how many tickets you sell to the Super Bowl versus the All-Star game."
Yeah, exactly. Hello.
We do like our winners.
We do like our winners. Well, you, Lori, have been a real winner for us. I really appreciate you bringing your knowledge and expertise and insights to the conversation. Lori Garver, former Deputy NASA Administrator, thank you for being on Steele and Ungar.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Michael.
All right, take care now.
Hey, I want to thank you all for listening. This is Rick Unger of Steele and Ungar on Sirius XM's POTUS Channel 124. You can catch us every evening, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern, and you can listen to our Steele and Ungar Rational Radio Daily Podcast for highlights of the day. You can get it over at steeleandungar.com, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you like to get your podcasts.